I've spent 30 years working as a head nurse in a nursing home, caring for thousands of elderly patients during their final stages of life. Over those years, I've witnessed patterns, subtle changes that families often overlook, thinking they're just signs of normal aging. But in reality, these small shifts are often quiet signals that the end of life is approaching. Most people don't realize it until it's too late. That's why in this video I want to share with you 5 warning signs I've seen repeatedly in the last 6 to 12 months of a person's life. These signs aren't meant to cause fear. They're here to help you prepare, to notice what truly matters, and to spend the remaining time with your loved ones more meaningfully. Let's begin. One of the first and most common signs I've observed is noticeable weight loss. And I don't mean just a small drop in appetite or a skipped meal here and there. This kind of weight loss is different. It's not just about eating less. It's a sign that the body is no longer processing and absorbing nutrients the way it used to. It's the body quietly starting to shut down from the inside out. I've heard countless families say, "Mom just hasn't been eating much lately," or "Dad's clothes are getting loose, but maybe it's just old age." But it's rarely just that. When an elderly person begins to lose weight, especially if it happens gradually over several weeks or months, it's often the body's way of signaling that it's no longer functioning at full strength. Metabolism slows down, muscle mass begins to decline. Even when food is consumed, the nutrients may not be properly absorbed, leading to visible changes in the body: thinner arms and legs, a sunken face, looser fitting clothes, a need to tighten belts or waistbands. What makes this even more concerning is how easily it's overlooked. Because it starts so subtly, many families don't recognize it until the change becomes stark, and by then, often several months have already passed. In my experience, more than 80% of the elderly patients I've cared for began to lose weight about a year before their passing. Sometimes it's just 2 or 3 kilograms at first, barely noticeable. But then the decline becomes more rapid, more obvious. Now, what should you do if you notice this happening to someone you love? Don't rush to force large meals or pressure them to eat more. It often causes more discomfort than help. Instead, focus on making food easier to consume and digest. Offer small, frequent portions of soft, nutrient-rich meals, soups, broths, porridges, anything warm, gentle, and comforting. And never forget the importance of hydration. Older adults often don't feel thirst as strongly, and dehydration can worsen the body's condition quickly. Encourage small sips of water throughout the day, little by little. Weight loss is not just about food, it's a message. It's the body's first quiet whisper that something deeper is changing. And once you begin to see this, it becomes even more important to pay close attention to the next signs. Because what often follows is something even more difficult to watch. A deep, persistent fatigue, one that rest alone can't seem to fix. Let's talk about that next. The second sign is something I've seen in nearly every patient nearing the end of life: profound exhaustion and physical weakness. And again, this isn't the kind of tiredness that goes away with a good night's sleep or a weekend of rest. This is a deep, lingering fatigue that gradually takes over, no matter how much rest is given. It's the kind of weariness that seems to live in the bones, that makes even the smallest task feel overwhelming. Families often notice it in small ways at first. A loved one who used to get up early now sleeps in longer. Someone who used to walk to the kitchen now prefers to stay in bed. A once active grandparent starts avoiding stairs, declining invitations, or skipping family outings. At first, most people think they're just getting older, or maybe they're just a little under the weather. But when the fatigue deepens and becomes more constant, it's a sign that the body is entering a new phase, one where energy is conserved for only the most essential functions. What's happening inside is even more telling. As the body prepares for its final chapter, the metabolic rate drops. The systems responsible for creating and distributing energy begin to slow. Organs that once worked in harmony begin to reserve their strength. The body enters what I often call an energy preservation mode, where it stops supporting non-essential activity and focuses only on the basics. Breathing, heartbeat, circulation, everything else becomes secondary. And as this physical fatigue sets in, emotional and social withdrawal often follows. People begin to withdraw from conversations, lose interest in hobbies, and sometimes even struggle to follow simple conversations. They might seem distant or unmotivated. But it's not a matter of willpower or attitude, it's the body doing what it knows to do, preserving the little energy that remains. In this stage, families often ask me, what should we do? Should we encourage more activity? Should we push them to move around? But from my experience, the most helpful thing is not to push, but to allow rest and to create moments of comfort. A walk to the garden may be too much, but sitting by the window with a warm blanket and quiet companionship can mean the world. Even just holding their hand, sitting in silence, or watching a favorite show together can offer more comfort than any medication. And when they do manage small efforts like standing up from a chair or taking a few steps, acknowledge it, gently praise it. These moments are precious, but most of all, remember that presence matters more than activity. You don't have to fill the silence. You just have to be there. This kind of deep fatigue often appears within 6 to 12 months before passing, just like the weight loss we talked about earlier. And when both of these signs show up together, it's time to become even more attentive, because what often comes next is not just physical, it's something more emotional, more internal. And that's what I'll share in the next part. The third sign is one of the most quietly heartbreaking changes I've seen. A decline in cognitive function and a gradual retreat into the inner world. It's a shift that's often misunderstood or dismissed as simple forgetfulness or age memory lapses. But this goes deeper than that. It's not just about misplacing items or forgetting names. It's about a slow fading of connection with the present, a soft unraveling of orientation to time, place, and sometimes even relationship. In the beginning, it may appear as small, harmless repetitions, asking the same question multiple times in a day, confusing the sequence of daily activities, or hesitating during conversations. Families often say, "She's been telling the same story over and over," or "He forgot what day it is again." But over time, these signs evolve. The person may begin to mix up names of close family members, struggle with recognizing familiar faces, or lose track of where they are, even in their own home. What's even more telling, and more painful, is the emotional withdrawal that often accompanies this cognitive decline. A once lively, talkative parent may become quiet, detached, or seem emotionally distant. They may start sitting alone during family gatherings, avoid eye contact, or appear uninterested in what's happening around them. This isn't just a shift in mood, it's a reflection of the mind slowly letting go of the outer world and turning inward. I remember one elderly woman I cared for. She had been a school teacher for over 40 years, sharp and articulate even in her old age. But one day she began struggling with the names of her grandchildren. A few weeks later, she stopped reading her favorite books. Then she began spending more time in silence, gazing out the window rather than engaging in conversation. Her family initially thought she was just tired or preoccupied, but it wasn't tiredness. It was the beginning of her inner withdrawal. She passed away 5 months later. This internal retreat often comes with another subtle but powerful sign, a sudden interest in the past. Many elderly individuals begin reminiscing more frequently, talking about their childhood, recalling old memories, or mentioning long-forgotten people and places. It's as if their life is quietly coming full circle, returning to where it all began. I've always believed that this is the mind's way of preparing, of organizing and reflecting on the journey before it comes to a close. So what should you do when you see this happening? The most important thing is not to try to pull them back forcefully into the present. Don't say, "Focus," or "You just told me that," or "Why can't you remember?" Those words only create frustration and sadness. Instead, meet them where they are. Let them talk about the past. Ask questions about their memories. Let them share their stories. Even if they've been told before, these moments are sacred. They are pieces of their identity, fragments of their soul being offered one last time. And sometimes, even when words begin to fail, emotional connection remains. A touch, a smile, a familiar song, these things still reach places that logic and language no longer can. I've seen patients who could no longer speak still respond to a loved one's hand on theirs, or to the sound of a gentle voice saying their name. When this kind of cognitive and emotional retreat begins, it's a clear signal that the journey is progressing toward its final stages. It's not something to fight against. It's something to honor and walk beside with compassion. And as this inner withdrawal deepens, another shift often follows, one that appears not in the mind, but in the body's defense system itself. Let's move on to that next. The fourth sign is one that families rarely recognize until it's well underway: a weakening of the immune system. It may not be as visible or as emotionally striking as weight loss or cognitive decline, but it's just as significant. In many ways, it is the body's quiet surrender, the gradual loss of its ability to protect itself from even the smallest threats. What does this look like in daily life? It might begin with something as simple as catching a cold and then not recovering as quickly as before, a minor cough that lingers for weeks, a small cut or bruise that takes unusually long to heal, recurring infections, urinary tract issues, or sudden bouts of pneumonia that seem to come out of nowhere. These are not isolated incidents. They're signs that the body's defenses are weakening, that the immune system, once a silent guardian, is no longer standing as strong as it used to. I remember caring for a woman who had been remarkably healthy all her life. Her family used to proudly say, "She never even catches a cold." But in the final 6 months, everything changed. She began catching colds every few weeks. A tiny scratch on her hand became infected. She had no energy to fight back, and despite the treatments, her body simply couldn't recover like it used to. She passed away not long after. Her family was shocked, but for me, it was a familiar pattern. And here's what most people don't realize: the decline in immunity is not just about getting sick more often. It's about the body's growing inability to heal, to regenerate, to bounce back. It reflects the deep internal exhaustion we spoke about earlier. The systems that once worked together to heal wounds, fight bacteria, and regulate inflammation begin to falter. It's not just vulnerability, it's the body slowly letting go of its protective instincts. Even emotionally, you may notice your loved one becoming more sensitive, less tolerant of cold, heat, or even slight discomfort. It's all connected. The immune system is intertwined with every other part of the body. As it weakens, the entire person becomes more fragile, not just physically, but emotionally and energetically as well. So what can you do during this time? The focus should not be on aggressive medical interventions. Instead, shift your attention toward comfort, cleanliness, and gentle care. Keep the environment warm and soothing. Wash hands often. Reduce exposure to crowds or visiting guests during flu season, and pay close attention to small signs: a cough, a fever, an unexplained fatigue. Support their body with small comforts: warm socks, clean bedding, fresh air, and easy-to-digest food. Hydration continues to be crucial. Never underestimate the power of small sips of water throughout the day. Even helping them moisturize their skin or apply lip balm can ease small discomforts and show them they are still cared for, still seen, still loved. And most of all, be present. This stage isn't about fighting what's coming, it's about accompanying someone with gentleness and dignity, honoring what their body is telling us. Because when the immune system begins to weaken, another final transformation is often just around the corner. One that reveals itself through the most vital functions of all: breathing and circulation. Let's look at that next. The fifth and final sign is often the most telling: changes in breathing and circulation. It's also one of the most overlooked until it becomes impossible to ignore. But for those of us who have walked alongside many people in their final months, we learn to notice these shifts early. The way a person breathes, the way their body distributes warmth. These are signals, sometimes subtle, sometimes sudden, that the body is nearing the end of its journey. In the beginning, the changes can be faint: slightly shallower breathing, an occasional pause, or a breath that seems slower or irregular. But over time, the pattern becomes clearer. Breathing may become labored or erratic, short and rapid at times, then long pauses in between. Some people begin to make soft noises while breathing, a kind of rattling or gurgling sound, especially when lying down. These are signs that the body is struggling to regulate airflow and clear fluids naturally. Alongside these respiratory changes, circulatory shifts also begin to show. You might notice that your loved one's hands and feet are often cold to the touch, even in a warm room. Their fingertips or lips might take on a bluish or purplish hue. These are not just signs of poor circulation, they're signs that the heart is no longer able to pump blood efficiently to the body's outermost areas. The body is conserving what little energy remains for the core, keeping the vital organs functioning as long as it can. Often I've seen families bring extra blankets thinking it's just a matter of keeping warm. But even thick covers can't change what's happening inside. The body is shifting, slowly letting go of the physical world, retreating into a state of stillness. And yet, this stage is not only about loss, it can also be a time of deep peace if we allow it to be. The goal now is not to intervene with aggressive treatments, but to create comfort, reduce distress, and offer presence. What can you do? Start with positioning. If your loved one is struggling to breathe, raising the upper body slightly with pillows can help ease the pressure on the lungs. Keep the room softly ventilated. Fresh air is helpful, but avoid direct cold drafts. Use lightweight, breathable blankets rather than heavy layers that may feel suffocating. Soft music, dim lighting, a calm atmosphere, these simple things can bring more relief than any. Hydration remains vital, though by this point many people may struggle to drink. Try offering moisture in other forms, ice chips, damp sponges, or a cooling mist. Keep the lips and mouth moist with balm or spray. Every small gesture matters more than you may think. This is also the time to stop worrying about doing everything perfectly. What matters now is being near, holding a hand, speaking gently, simply being there. Even if they cannot respond in words, they still feel your presence. They still feel your love. Breathing and circulation changes often mark the final transition, the body's last chapter before letting go. And while it may feel heavy and painful, it can also be a sacred time, a moment where you're not just witnessing the end, you're offering companionship, peace, and dignity in someone's final hours. And that perhaps is the most important thing I've learned in all my years, not how to prevent death, but how to honor life until the very last breath. Now that you've heard all 5 signs, let's take a moment to reflect on what they truly mean and how we can respond with presence, not fear. Let me share some final thoughts with you. Beyond simply recognizing these signs, what matters most is how we choose to respond, how we prepare our hearts and minds for the precious time that remains with those we love. Because at this stage, it's no longer about extending life at all costs. It's about honoring the life that still remains and making every remaining moment as meaningful and gentle as possible. So many families ask, should we try another treatment, another test, another hospital visit? But sometimes more treatment doesn't mean more life. It just means more pain, more fatigue, more time spent away from home, from warmth, from love. What truly matters in these final weeks or months is not another procedure, but the presence of familiar voices, soft blankets, the quiet holding of a hand, and the unspoken comfort of being together. This is the time to shift focus, from curing to caring, from urgency to stillness, from fear to presence. It's the simple, quiet things that bring the most peace now. A warm meal, a gentle touch, a whispered, "I'm here," a shared memory. You don't need the perfect words or medical knowledge, you just need to be there. Because in the end, your presence is the most powerful medicine of all. Sometimes just sitting beside them without speaking, holding their hand in silence, or helping them sip water slowly, these are the most profound acts of love. These are the moments they feel safest, most seen, most held. not by machines or medicines, but by your heart. And that is the deeper message behind every sign I've shared with you, not just to notice what is fading, but to bring light and warmth to what still remains. Not to fear the end, but to walk it gently, with dignity, grace, and love. Because the truth is, we cannot always add more days to a life, but we can always add more life to the days that remain. These gentle changes, so often brushed aside as ordinary signs of aging, may in fact be the quiet whispers of life itself, subtle messages that the journey is nearing its end. And if we learn to listen closely, with our hearts as much as with our eyes, we may recognize that these moments are not just medical facts, but sacred invitations to be fully present. There is something deeply human, deeply spiritual in this final chapter of life. It reminds us that death is not a sudden event, but a gradual letting go, a soft fading of light that asks for tenderness, not panic, for presence, not noise. Every small change, a lost appetite, a tired breath, a distant gaze, might be the soul's way of saying goodbye in its own quiet language. And if we're not paying attention, we might miss it. We might miss the chance to say, "I love you" one more time, to hold a hand a little longer, to sit in silence and simply be there. Because what looks like a small shift on the outside could be the Spirit's final message on the inside, a whisper that says, "I am preparing to go." And that is why we must listen, not with fear, but with reverence, so that when the time comes, there is no regret. Only love, only peace, only the gentle knowing that we were there fully until the very end.